Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. Delighted today to be joined by Claire Bailey, who's independent retail expert and founder of Retail Champion. Hi, Claire.
Hi, good afternoon.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. Enjoying the fact that we've got some late September sunshine. Not so much enjoying the fact that we've had pretty tragic news today for the high street and for consumer-facing businesses in general.
No, it's been a strange day, and I'm not quite sure what the future looks like, but we will touch on that in this podcast. I think we'll
Definitely.
we'll have a look into what we think. I'm sure we'll be right on some stuff and massively wrong on others. But yeah, like you say, the interesting times. So the government today have announced they're upscaling the lockdown measures, or we're going backwards slightly, not into full lockdown, but pubs and restaurants closing at 10. There's lots of table service only, so no bar service. And we were just talking off air around. There's lots of companies who are coming out, certainly in that industry, and I think you've got the exact figures around potential job losses.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, I mean, obviously the people listening to this today that we're referring to is the 22nd of September. So we have heard as of this morning that TUI, the travel company, have announced 8,000 jobs at risk worldwide. Then we heard that Whitbread, predominantly through their Premier Inn brand, are announcing 6,000 job losses, mainly due to the lack of business travellers using the facilities that they offer during the week. And then a smaller number, but not necessarily a small number if you're one of those employees, Wetherspoons, through their 6 airport outlets, have announced 425 of the 1,000 people they employ through their airport outlets will also be made redundant. So to have a day with announcements that represent the best part of £15,000 potential redundancy, 15,000 potential redundancies within the consumer-facing sector. That's really, really quite dramatic. And I don't think we've had a news day quite like it. So obviously there will be a lot of people out there in the retail and consumer-facing sectors who are looking at this and thinking, well, what does that mean for me? Particularly those who might still be on furlough or who have gone back to work but are noticing smaller numbers of visitors. And with the additional measures that will be coming into force on Thursday, the 24th, obviously we've got the rule of 6, but now it'll be table service only, the 10 o'clock curfew as it's being referred to. I think that a lot of these businesses will increasingly struggle to make ends meet. And I think that this percolates down through every segment of the high street.
Yeah, and my fear is that this is the tip of the iceberg. There's some big numbers today, but I have a real sneaking suspicion end of furlough, post-Christmas trade, and whatever Cyber Monday, Black Friday looks like this year, we'll see more and more. I think people shouldn't think this is the eye of the storm. I think there's much more to come, unfortunately.
I agree, and I've been kind of, I never wanted to be the bearer of bad news or sort of like the Grim Reaper, but I've been saying this for 6 months, ever since we went into lockdown in March, that those millions of people that were furloughed, and there still are millions, would they ever have employers who could really honestly take them back into employment? And it's a really major problem for the high street, not just because it's high street businesses that have been horribly affected by all of this, but moreover, it's the consumer confidence impact. In so much as if you're furloughed from an engineering or manufacturing company, it doesn't directly influence the high street, but it influences the ability for people to feel comfortable spending money with the high street businesses. And as a result, obviously footfall, we know from the data, is very much down, around 30% less than this time last year. And of course, last year wasn't exactly a buoyant year, but there's a deviation there in so much as city centres and retail destinations are much more down than local community outlets. And that's, I think, representative of the fact that people are preferencing to go to spend with their local community a few minutes drive or walk from home rather than making an actual trip out to a place to do shopping. Because shopping isn't the same as it was, and neither is hospitality. And I think that level of change in the footfall dynamic, coupled with people being very concerned about, well, will I even have a job in a few months? What does this mean to me? And that's much greater than just the retail and hospitality sectors. I think that's impacting spending. And it's, of course, meaning that those people in the consumer sector are struggling enormously.
So what are the high streets the regional shopping centres, so places that we've kind of pulled away from and gone local, what are they going to have to do to strive to grow when we start to see kind of the green routes come back through?
Well, I think the thing is, it's about providing the really positive customer experience. And one of the first factors in this new world we live in, is safety. To make sure that we feel that we can go there, we can give the social distancing rules the sort of respect it deserves, and actually enjoy going out into our centres without feeling at risk. And there's been a lot of talk lately about businesses who, of course, have maybe failed in many respects to monitor the behavior of their customers. And it's really difficult for business owners, especially if they're independent. Because if you're, for example, an independent bar or nightclub, and there comes a point when you ask everybody to leave, you create a wave of people hitting the streets. And that, of course, doesn't really comply with social distancing. Because you're creating a large number of people at a place at a point in time. So I think there's a lot of conflict with businesses in terms of how they're actually managing these processes. But the most important thing to consumers, I think, at the moment is my visit worthwhile? Is it going to be pain-free or painful? Or rather, another word that we like to use is frictionless. And therefore, how is my experience today? And we're finding that customers are researching much more using online methods and going out with a purpose. So whilst we refer to footfall being down on average around about 30%, what we're also seeing is the average spend per visit's gone up. And I think that relates to the fact that more and more people are looking online, planning their purchases, doing click and collect and so on. And they're going to their town centres, city centres and retail destinations on a mission. They're in, grab, out, home, because there isn't really a great experience that anyone can offer with the restrictions. But that leads us to the most important factor: findability, online presence, and engaging customers through whatever digital channels are available to them in order to capture that sale. Because if you don't, somebody else will.
So this comes back to some of the age-old debate in retail, and we've talked about this in a couple of podcasts with various people. So there's omni-channel in there, isn't there, in terms of how do I make it frictionless so I can buy it in one place, take it back somewhere else without a whole bunch of things. One that drives me mad is if you pay by PayPal and take it back to a store, the whole refund bit gets a wee bit interesting. But also the part around, you were talking about experience. Again, we've seen over the years, the Microsoft shop on Oxford Street is a good example, these experiential stores. Apple, I think, are really good at it because it's not about you buying it there. It's about reinforcing the brand, making it a bit different. And I think our typical retailers, the ones probably primarily that are on more of the big retail parks, are still very internally focused in those bricks and mortar walls of the sales budget in this store or the footfall in this store, rather than the bigger picture of, it's fine if someone comes and has a look. If they buy it in my postcode, I think the digitally native retailers credit those stores with the sale. Otherwise, there's nothing in it for them other than somebody's, had a chat about the car seat for half an hour, but actually they've gone home and bought it online. They've still bought it from the same brand. I think there's got to be a big shift in mindset.
Yeah.
And a winning mindset of we're all in this together and the pounds are all going in the same pot, rather than I have a store sales budget. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is a conversation. I remember, it was pre-2010. I sat in on a round table for a then retail consultancy practice called Chatteris, and they happened to work with retailers. I mean, they're withdrawn from that sector now, perhaps for obvious reasons. But one of the biggest conversations was, what does multi-channel versus omni-channel mean? And in many respects, I think it was a little bit cynically, I suggested that omni-channel was the rebranding of multi-channel because multi-channel didn't really work. And so they came up with a new name. And the fact of the matter is that the case that they presented was, I won't name the business, they've latterly gone into administration like many, but they didn't credit the store with a sale if it was in postcode area, and you didn't have that joined up experience. And actually, the store and online, it needs to be seamless. You need to recognize the fact that a customer bought from the brand. everybody had a role to play in that, whether it be that the products were in the window and it caught someone's attention and they quickly Googled it, whether they went in and got advice, whether they went online, found it, went into the store, spoke to somebody and arranged a delivery, or whatever it may be. The customer journey is facilitated by a mix of physical and digital. Trying to create demarcation lines is nonsensical because it's one company, one brand. And until businesses recognize that you might not make a single sale through your EPOS in a store, but what value add did that store make? And I recognize that because for the last 3 years, and hopefully it will happen this year as well, I've supported Amazon with their Home of Black Friday, which is a pop-up customer experience. And what they have is they have these things called smile codes. They're basically QR codes that link you through to the app, and you can Prime now or Prime later. There is no stock in the store, but there's product demonstrators. It's a really cool experience. You get to touch and feel items, and it's set out like a home. And all I could ever think about, going back to the almost 3 years ago now when I first supported them when they were in Soho Square, was that why aren't physical retailers who've got the asset of physical space doing something like this and creating that integration of the physical and digital so it's a seamless, really engaging experience? It doesn't take that much effort. They've got the space, they've got the asset, and behind the scenes, they've got the stock. So if Amazon can chuck a store together for 3 days and turn around that kind of experience, surely everybody else who already has high street assets can. And I think that there's too many people quick to berate the likes of Amazon, who arguably, so they've done really well for themselves and everything else, but they simply delivered what customers wanted. They would not have been successful if they didn't give a convenient, accessible customer experience. That's what they've done. They're not necessarily the best price, but swipe to buy, product availability, Prime now. They have stood out as the outstanding online-only retailer with the best possible customer experience. And I think that there's a lot of people that simply look at them as a threat instead of looking at them as an inspiration and thinking, what could we do to be able to give what they give, but also give more because we've got the physical asset of our store estate. And to me, that's the missed trick for physical retail.
And I think there's a couple of other examples we've talked about historically as well. I think Primark was one. You can tell your IKEA delivery story in a second as well. Hence why we're recording today and not yesterday. Certainly Primark, for me, they're really clear on the experience. They're clear on what you get. I think some of the discounters are exactly the same as well. Therefore, you're kind of not disappointed if you have to queue slightly or if the store's maybe not as tidy because it's just been absolutely packed with people. Maybe not what you want in current world, but they're really, really, really clear with their brand, the promise and the expectation, which is reflected in the price.
Absolutely. And I think what's fascinating about Primark, and I mean, I must give acknowledgement to the team at maybetech.com who've done some analysis. Primark's level of digital engagement, social media engagement with customers during lockdown was phenomenal. They have a fraction of the followers of, for example, Victoria's Secret, but were able to engage with more customers more meaningfully. That meant that they were remaining connected. They were not able to trade online. They don't have e-commerce, which you might consider a huge mistake in the current environment. And arguably, I would not suggest any retailer in the current environment not have some form of e-commerce. But Primark still owned it because they created the buzz, they created the queues. People could not wait for them to be open. And I think they're possibly the only retailer I see, even to this day, with queues outside the door. And what they've done so well is they've just simply talked to customers. They want to talk about makeup. They give a makeup tutorial. They show people how you can use product. They talk about fashion. They talk about celebrity. They don't say, hey, buy from Primark every 5 minutes. They simply talk to the audience that they know are their highest spending customers, and it works. And then you mentioned IKEA, pretty much the same. What they offer is something that's low cost and inconvenient, but you trade off the inconvenience for the cost. And yes, you're right. I did have to wait in for a very random delivery period yesterday for IKEA that meant we couldn't record this podcast because I was told that their delivery would be between 8 and 6. A couple of hours before they were due to arrive, it got edited to 2 till 6. Within about an hour of that window, it became 2:40 till 3:40. And they arrived at 2:40. Right on the nose. They were in and out really quickly, did a really good job. And I'm very happy to pay for their delivery because it saves me going to the store, picking my own product, loading my car, which is always a nightmare, unloading my car. 35 quid for that delivery, job's a good one because my nearest IKEA is about 40 miles away. But the inability to tell me when they were going to deliver until the day of delivery did cause a certain amount of friction. However, would it stop me buying from them again? Absolutely not, because I still reconcile the fact that it's worth every penny. The product's great, the service is adequate, and you don't get any arguments with them. They could probably communicate with me better, but they did a good job. And you only have to look at the queues, again, when IKEA reopened to trade, to understand just how much consumers love that brand.
And they're great examples. Clearly, over the last, I don't know, probably 10 years, we've started to get examples of retailers where it kind of doesn't work and they fail, cash flow, customers fall out of love with them, they don't strive to deliver experience, or they're not clear on their brand promise, so everybody's a bit confused. I think the case in example at the moment is probably department stores.
Mm-hmm. And I'd add Marks and Spencer's to that list.
Yeah. Other than food, again, you question yourself when you last shop there for clothes. So I'm probably not old enough to be in the true catchment demographic. My mum is, but yeah, the only stuff I'd shop there for was food. I don't particularly look at the clothes anymore. My assumption is they're not for me because they're not the style I like, or the colours I like, or the fit I like, which means I don't even bother checking it out anymore. I've made my mind up to a degree. They're interesting because if you think of the current world, people want to shop less frequently and go to less places. You'd think actually a department store is the perfect place to go if it's got a food hall, if it's got beauty, if it's got clothes, if it's got electrical. It's almost your one-stop shop. Yet they just seem to kind of lurch from one struggle to the next. So I don't know if you've got any views on that or anything you can share with us in terms of the department store struggle.
Well, I think for a lot of people, and particularly, I mean, women's wear always used to carry department stores, but it's difficult to shop a category, let's say women's wear, where it's broken down by concession or brand. Because if a lady would like to find a dress for work or a jacket or a dress for an evening out, you don't want to have to visit 5 to 10 to 15 different departments in order to shop that one solution. We are used to working in an online world where we can apply filters. We want to apply by colour, size, use, function. So occasion wear, evening wear, work wear. You put these filters in and you get a curated range presented to you online. If a store isn't presenting that, it becomes not frictionless, to keep repeating that word. But the experience is not smooth. It's really frustrating because also comparing products, I might be in one brand area and see something I quite like, but then I think, I might need to trot back half a mile across this enormous shop to look at the other brand to compare and contrast pricing and colour and design and style. You can do that online in a moment. So I think that the way that department stores presented themselves to the consumer was out of date, given that the majority are relatively high-spending, digitally savvy, enabled people. So flip that over and let's think about how can you present a department store to a customer in a solution mindset rather than I'm going to shop this brand or that brand or another brand. And that's almost impossible without considering the customer decision tree. It would encompass a huge amount of re-merchandising, possibly some significant arguments with suppliers who say, you promised us this amount of space and so on. And the department store model then begins to collapse. Whereas what we are seeing is spaces being used for relatively creative organizations, independent businesses who are perhaps designer makers, pop-ups and so on, and almost indoor markets where it's a journey of discovery. You can't find it online. It's not that it belongs to one brand or another brand or something else. It's you're going to speak to the person that made this product or designed it or is like the right-hand man or woman of the person that designed it. And that's what makes those kind of almost similar to department store experiences, very interesting, but also very relevant to the modern consumer, because we can buy stuff anytime, any place, anywhere, from pretty much any brand just by Googling it and looking online. We can't speak to the designer, understand the provenance of a product and the worth of it, unless we know the person behind it. So what might look like a £50 dress from Primark could be a £500 dress if the designer made it by hand themselves to their own unique template. And that's, I think, what a lot of people are looking for today. They will spend less and less on what I refer to as the boring basics, and maybe treat themselves to a couple of one-off, unique speciality items that make themselves feel good, and they also feel that they've contributed to the local economy.
So it's a word we've not used yet, but it's leaning more towards that personalisation.
Absolutely, very much so. Personalisation, I think, has been a bit of an underplayed trend. Many years ago, back in Box Park in Shoreditch, which of course was Roger Wade's concept, the pop-ups like Nike IDs and others, where you could do some level of customization to your product. But ultimately, personalization comes down to bespoke, tailoring, one-off and unique. And I think that a lot of people have got tired of having stuff. And if they can get rid of stuff and own things that are meaningful, which again plays into the whole environmental agenda and the upcycling, recycling agenda, which of course we've seen John Lewis and Selfridges go into with secondhand items. I think that there will be a lot more people recycling items and upcycling items, but then similarly looking for those one or two unique pieces that are emotionally important to them, rather than just a thing of ownership, a badge to wear. I believe consumers have changed quite dramatically, and maybe COVID's accelerated that. Certainly COVID has seen us change our online behavior. We've seen 10 years worth of growth in 3 months, according to some of the McKinsey stats and others. And that, and the ONS as well bears that out, in so much as we had only grown to online representing about 18.6, 19.6, it wobbled around that sort of area, percent of all retail sales. And suddenly, within the period of January to April 2020, that jumped to just over 30%, which is a 50% growth in 3 months. That's phenomenal. However, we need to keep ourselves real. Feet on the ground, it's still only 30% of all retail sales. But I'd love to see a stat that said how much of all retail sales are influenced by online, social media, peer-to-peer recommendation, review sites, all of that content that influences consumers to make a decision to buy or not from a retailer or a brand or not. That's something that we don't really have a measure on. And I don't know how you'd measure it, in all honesty. I can't answer that question, but wouldn't that be a fascinating statistic? Because I would hazard a guess that almost all physical retail sales, other than real proper impulse, are influenced by some level of online content.
Yeah, I'd agree. There's a sphere of influence measure somewhere that somebody needs to create to help us out. So kind of what you're saying is we're going to have less, but the stuff we have is going to mean more.
I'd like to think so. And I believe that consumerism is changing. We are seeing charity shops, they grew. Other shops contracted. We've seen John Lewis and Selfridges recognising this by offering second-hand, recycled, refurbished. We've always bought second-hand cars. So why not? And there's also subscription options coming out which are very ethical. There was one I saw called, I think it's Toy Box. You get age-appropriate toys for a month and you can send them back and get another batch. So you don't fill your house with toys that the kids tire of. You don't end up with a bunch of plastic. You give them back and then they go to somebody else who maybe pays less because they're now used. But the whole concept is like a library or radio rentals as it used to be. And maybe we're moving back to a model where we don't actually own things. We use them for their useful life within our family circumstances and then pass them on to the next person. And ultimately, yes, they'll get worn out and tired, but there will have been more use of them. Otherwise, I mean, I know from my own experience, I used to drop bags and bags and bags of kids' clothes and toys off to charity shops. And I'm sure anyone listening to this can feel that experience, because kids tire of stuff so quickly. So those kind of organizations who are recognizing it's relevant now, it's not, they are actually really interesting, and they're changing and disrupting consumerism. And I think that COVID's accelerated that too. People have really questioned, what do they really need? They spent a lot of time at home, a lot of time with their families, and they've questioned a lot of their behaviors and their habits. Coupled with consumer confidence, that changes consumerism quite dramatically.
Yeah, I think subscription is going to be big. Clearly, Pret have just come out with the coffee subscription. Bit of a no-brainer, really. I'm kind of looked at it and thought, God, why has nobody done that before? The interesting.
This is even bigger, though. I mean, we're talking about major brands who will still potentially use their retailers as distribution channels, but they may come up with a concept that provides a business-to-consumer channel from a brand that cuts out the retailer and that might take 10, 15, 20% market share. That sucks share away from already struggling retailers. And the brands will still concur that they need the retailers on side. They need to sell through the retailers. And yet somehow they will go direct. And Apple is a really good example of that. And then think about others. Like there's Sony stores, there's Samsung stores and so on. But Apple's probably the leading light in so much as we think that they might be a tech company, but they think of themselves as a retail company. And that's where it gets really interesting and the lines get very blurred about the channels and the routes to market and where is the customer actually buying from. And if you are the brand owner, the customer might be more inclined to buy from you because you know more about your product than anyone else. And that simply secures the loyalty and the trust of the customer. So the whole subscription and the B2C and everything else, it's a really, really interesting new movement. And I think that will be quite disruptive to retail.
Yeah, I think Heinz started doing it during lockdown, didn't they? You could get beans.
Heinz to home.
The interesting one, I don't know if you've seen it, is On Running. So they've just done a trainer subscription.
Not seen that one, but that's not right. I don't prefer to run.
So I'll tell you about it. So they've made trainers out of castor beans, which is interesting in itself because it's sustainable.
Yeah.
You sign up at, I think it's America at the moment, $30 a month. They send you a pair of these trainers. And then when you've done so many miles in them, you send them back. They recycle them. So it's low carbon footprint, green. Send you a new pair. And again, you just think, it's so simple and genius. Why hasn't somebody been there before? Because massive market, really difficult to have innovation in a new technology and running because there's so much competition and so much work being done on it. But actually that model of people always want new trainers. If you're running in them, you always want comfortable ones with good support, making it green and sustainable. And then a model where I'm sure, if you're into it, big style, $30 a month, whatever it'll be over here, 25 quid. If you're into it and you're paying £200 a pair of trainers, it's probably a net in terms of cost. And actually, it encourages you to be fit because the more you run and the more miles you do, the quicker you get your new pair. So it's like one of those, it's been quite heavily advertised in the sports world. And I think there's some knocking around on LinkedIn as well now that you can find. But it's one of those where you just sit back and think, that's genius stuff.
Yeah. And I think that is something that traditional retailers need to really start paying attention to, because brands are going to bypass them because they're going to struggle to be able to sell products at a consumer acceptable price whilst maintaining a margin if they have to sell through retailers, because retailers' costs are going up. We've got rates, upward-only rent reviews, utilities, minimum wage. I'm not suggesting that any of those things are necessarily wrong, but it puts enormous pressure on the supply chain. And if brands set themselves up with a vertically integrated supply chain such that they're driving out all those efficiencies, gaining the margin for themselves, and they've developed their business, especially if they're starting from afresh with a completely new, different model, then I think they will be taking share from retailers very, very quickly. Because, of course, retailers were there to offer what was called break bulk. Suppliers supplied whole lorries. They went into warehouses, and warehouses picked amounts of stock to go to shops, and customers could buy in single units. But if you can buy in single units direct from manufacturer and cut out all of that, not only have you been environmentally impactful, but you've also saved a huge amount of cost in the supply chain. And the efficiency that leads to, and arguably the profitability that leads to, is considerable. And this is where I think one of the big risks lies for retailers, that unless they have an enormous amount of value add in terms of customer experience, product knowledge, and customer almost coaching around what kind of products they need to buy, they will struggle to steal the march on those kind of businesses who've come at it from a whole new perspective and we will develop something that people want, people need, and are willing to pay for, but we're going to strip all the cost out of the process and go from manufacturer to customer without anybody else in the middle taking a margin. And that, to me, strikes me as one of the biggest threats at the moment to retailers.
No, I agree. I think some can see it coming. I think others will get blindsided by it. Listen, it's been fantastic chatting, Claire. I think we could go on for hours in terms of our views. And I'm sure, as I said at the start, we'll have got some of this right and we'll look back and some of it maybe a bit wrong, but always good to share. If people want to find out more about you or speak to you, where's the best place for them to contact you?
Well, I guess if they come to me direct through either retailchampion.co.uk for direct retail and selling to retail businesses, and if there's place management professionals who are concerned for their town centres and high streets, then groundedplaces.com, as I operate the two different brands. But it's been a good conversation, inspirational as always, and I'm sure we could carry on for hours, but I'm not convinced everybody wants to listen to this for hours. We'll just have to call it a day.
Good. And I'll link you in so people can find you on LinkedIn as well. So final question then. We ask everybody that comes on the podcast, what's the best bit of business advice you've ever been given?
Know your customer so obsessively that you know them better than yourself, because only when you know your customer so obsessively will you ever be able to predict their current and future needs and deliver what they expect from you as a brand.
Wise words. Really like that one. Thanks, Claire. Take care.
My pleasure. Thank you.